Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 70. This time we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're not looking at a particular story or interviewing a guest. Instead, we'll be answering your questions on Conan Doyle's life and work, which we've received over the last few weeks. And we've been really delighted by the response, haven't we, Paul?
Yeah, I've had a really good response and some very interesting questions, and ones that have made us have to do a bit of work, to be honest. But yeah, I think we'll hopefully have an interesting show lined up on the back of this.
Yeah, great. So thank you to everyone who sent us questions. We'd like to especially thank Mark Chatterton and Alexi Barkwan, who corralled a lot of questions on behalf of the patrons. So much so, in fact, that there'll be a bonus episode where we will answer more of your questions. And that will be available to anybody who subscribes to us on Patreon. You don't need to be a paid subscriber. You can be a free subscriber on Patreon, but it will mean that you'll be able to get access to the bonus episode. So go to patreon.com/Doings of Doyle and you'll be able to get that episode there. So we've grouped these questions into themes. And let's get started with our first theme, which really concerns works about Conan Doyle. So a question from Mark Chatterton and the patrons. What would you consider the most essential books for studying the life and works of Conan Doyle? And who's your favourite Doylean scholar?
Oh, how many to read out? So quite a few. I mean, it's essentials for my money. Memories and Adventures by Conan Doyle himself. Treat with caution, as with all autobiography.
Yep.
And Through the Magic Door.
Definitely.
Conan Doyle, which to me, I've always found is actually far more revealing than Memories and Adventures because he's more relaxed.
Yeah.
And he is talking about himself, but in a way that's it's done at a remove. So you've got all sorts of interesting opinions coming out in that book, and yeah, it's very interesting his literary criticism and it really gives you a sense of the man. Essentials in terms of if you're going to really study the subject, you've got to have the bibliography of A. Conan Doyle by Richard Lancelyn Green and John Michael Gibson. It's absolutely indispensable.
Yeah.
And the same goes for a chronology of the life of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle by Brian Pugh.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, if you've got those two books by your side when you're researching, you can't go too far wrong. And one this is the first kind of book of criticism I bought when I first went to uni on this subject. The Uncollected Sherlock Holmes, edited by Richard Lancelyn Green, which is just it's wonderful and completely reliable.
Yeah.
Thorough piece of scholarship, and you can't go wrong with it. And the choices of the pieces that he's put in there, it's absolutely brilliant. A nice chatty little book on Conan Doyle by Michael Durder.
That's a very good.
The Washington Post critic, and he puts Conan Doyle in a very personal context for Michael Durder himself, but also the literary context of Doyle, and it's just wonderfully chatty.
Yeah,
there's a lot of ideas going on in it, and a lot of you can't go wrong if you follow up a lot of Michael's recommendations and suggestions with that as well. Oh, and of course, another one, which again, I'd say with a certain degree of caution, Conan Doyle: A Life in Letters,
Yeah.
edited by John Ellenberg, Dan Stillshaw, and Charles Foley. Reservations because the letters are very carefully selected, nearly all from Conan Doyle to his mother.
Mm.
You only get a certain degree. You don't get the wider, correspondence with
Yeah.
that. But nevertheless, it is, the first proper volume really of Conan Doyle's letters. Yeah, another one, Something of Themselves by Sarah Lefanu, who we interviewed in an early show. Really, and I'd recommend people go back and listen to
Mm.
Sarah again because very interesting chat and a wonderful book on Conan Doyle, Kipling, and Mary Kingsley in the Boer War. And again, it's taking things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Can't recommend that highly enough, really. From Holmes to Sherlock by Matthias
Yes. It's a
Bostrom,
very good piece.
which is just it's a real it's a masterwork,
Mm.
kind of all the legacy, the Holmes legacy. And if you want to know about what went on after Conan Doyle's death, and you want to know about issues regarding his sons and the estate and the legacy and various shenanigans, it's a wonderful read and
Yeah,
just
it
just
is.
brilliantly written. And he's a bit of an outlier, but it's a book that I think everybody needs to have in their library, and it is a classic, and I still use it. Is the Sherlock Holmes Companion by Michael and Molly Hardwick, which is an extremely useful little book. Yeah, and it's a lovely little book in itself, just for the shelf. But pioneering work really,
Yeah.
and it is more or less reliable
Yeah.
as well, which you can't say of a number of books from that sort of 60s, 70s era,
Yes.
where this one actually is, it's very well put together and to this day, a useful guide.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't disagree with any of those,
Mm.
as you would expect.
Mhm.
But there are a couple of others I might have included in there. One of them is, um, I think, the Sherlock Holmes Reference Library by Les Klinger, when that was edited, that
Mm.
later
Mm.
developed into the annotated.
Yep.
I think that earlier version has longer footnotes, it's more expansive, and that still is a reference work I go to time and again. And the other is the Conan Doyle Encyclopedia Online, which is maintained by Alexei Barkwan, which
Hmm.
I cannot see how the scholarship of Conan Doyle studies can really be done without access to that, in the same way as access to, I think, Brian Pugh's chronology and indeed
Mm.
Gibson and Green's bibliography. They're central anchor points for any piece of scholarship, I think.
Mm. I think with the online encyclopedia
Yeah,
is all the illustrations that are
yeah,
available. And
absolutely.
as you say, it's an indispensable aid.
Now, in that list, we didn't include biographies. Because we got another question here, which was from Mark and Nicole Climate on Blue Sky. Which biography or biographies do you recommend, and what do you see as their respective strengths and weaknesses? And I'll come back to that question that I asked
Mm.
before. Who's your favorite Doylean scholar? Because I'm fairly sure it connects.
Oh, it does certainly connect with me on this one. Is the book which I still think is the single best book written on Conan Doyle, is The Quest for Sherlock Holmes by Owen Dudley Edwards. First published in 82. Still, it's a pioneer.
Yeah,
Really led the way, and we'll discuss later about the whole problems with the closure of the Conan Doyle archive by his
yeah,
son
yeah,
Adrian. But when Owen wrote this book, he couldn't get access,
yes,
so he was forced to look elsewhere and went to the archives in Edinburgh and
yes,
found out an awful lot, using classic archive research by a first-rate historian. Really showed up or lit a light on Conan Doyle's early life. Really came up with Brian Charles Waller
yeah,
and
that's
the
right.
role of Brian Charles Waller,
Yeah,
who'd been mentioned in previous biographies in a very offhand manner, almost as Brian Waller, a friend of the family. That's about
yeah,
it. And Owen really exposed what was going on there. Cornerstone of both Doylean and Sherlockian scholarship.
yeah,
There was also the fact that Owen went pretty deeply into Charles Doyle's alcoholism
yes,
and the effect that he didn't discover this. This wasn't new. This really came out in 1978 with the Doyle Diary,
yeah, yeah.
which I think was it Michael Baker
Michael Baker, yeah.
edited that, and that I was the first time that it had been revealed in any depth. But the Baker book is very irritating. Its introduction is done as here's a work of detection where Baker's pretending to be Sherlock, and it can get quite irritating. But again, is an important book, as
Mm,
much for there's lovely pictures by Charles Doyle,
yeah.
but yeah, all that really, it was with Owen's book, that the alcoholism of Charles Altamont Doyle
Mm,
began to appear front and center. I love it in particular because it also echoes another one of my favorite books, which is The Quest for Corvo by A.J.A. Simmons, and
yes.
Owen in his title is making a deliberate reference
Yeah.
there, and Simmons, when he was looking into Baron Corvo, there were no real archives, very difficult to find sources, and so it makes the biographer resourceful,
Yeah.
and makes a story of it as well. Of the actual making of the biography becomes a story, and you get that to a certain extent with Owen's book as well. But the side that must be said about it is it's not a full biography.
Yes.
It's only covering the first, I think, 23 to 25 years of Doyle's life.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've always thought it's a shame we didn't get a 3 volume.
And I think that there is another problem, I think, which is that it's not footnoted and it's not
No,
indexed in that way, which means that as a aid for other scholars, it has some limitations. But I think you're exactly right. You're exactly on the money in terms of how important it was, because we've got to remember at the time it was written, Conan Doyle was beyond the pale in terms of academic scholarship.
mm,
He was just not suitable for consideration. And Owen really was the person who broke open the door, to the extent that when the Edinburgh edition of the works of Conan Doyle was launched, Owen was one of the principal speakers, because I think everybody recognizes, particularly in the academic community, the inheritance that they owe to Owen for kind of
mm,
breaking open the door in that respect. So, who else have you
mm.
got on your list of best biographers?
Yeah, I think the next on that is after that is Andrew Lycett's Conan Doyle, the man who created Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
It's in a way it's a shame that about the subtitle, because again we've got Conan Doyle, overwhelmed by Sherlock. But you can see what I mean. Lycett's publishers will have said, you've got to have a Sherlock reference in there. So
Yeah.
Lycett is the first, or was the first biographer to get access, and we will discuss this probably later as well. Once the archive had been sold,
Yeah.
at the famous sale in 2004, Lycett got access to the letters that the British Library
Yes.
had bought at that sale, and so he was the first to be able to do a really thorough primary source biography of Conan Doyle since Pierre Nordon in the early 1960s.
Yeah.
And it's written by an experienced and professional biographer
Yeah.
as well. So he'd done biographies of Dylan Thomas and Ian Fleming. So there's plenty of work he'd been able to do before the
Mm.
Doyle biography. So it is, as you would expect, very well written, very well structured. And it is, I think now it's become one of the cornerstones
Yes, it
of
is.
Conan Doyle research that you have to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And the number of times that we start work on the podcast, and one of the first sources I will go to is Lycett, just to
Mm,
double check on facts. And, he's very good at telling the grand sweep of Conan Doyle's life as well.
yes. Mm,
What about your
mm.
third then?
Well, the third is it's a kind of two books I'd reckon, and these are the
Oh, that's a
earlier
cheat.
ones. It's a bit of a cheat, I know, but I can't separate them because they were both sort of official Adrian Conan Doyle
Okay.
sponsored ones, as it were. And the first is John Dixon Carr's
Right.
biography from 1949, which you've got to be careful with it.
Yeah.
Uh, Carr is a bit cavalier. He's got a line to push, and he had Adrian Conan Doyle breathing down his neck. So it's very much Conan Doyle as the knight errant
Yes,
constantly. You
absolutely.
won't find much negative
No.
about Conan Doyle written in this book, but nevertheless, it is a really good gallop through the life. It doesn't slip up too much in that respect, and it's written by a novelist who knows how to write.
It's
So
written
it
by a
really is,
storyteller.
yeah,
Yeah.
you race through it. So it is good. I mean, one of the things that I would criticize most about it is this idea of Conan Doyle always referred to his mother as the mom.
Oh, yes.
It's just, but this is coming from Adrian.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, as a starter, I would always recommend it with
Yes.
reservations. And the other was Conan Doyle by the French scholar Pierre Nordon, which was
Yeah, yeah,
really the
yeah.
first academic biographical study of Doyle. It's a funny one because it's not a biography per se. It's very thematically structured.
Mm,
But Nordon has a lot of interesting things to say. He was a proper scholar, knew how to use the archive.
yeah.
But again, he's got Adrian overseeing it all. And the other problem is, it was published in French in 1964 and then translated, I think, by Francis Partridge
Mm.
into English in 1966. But the English version we have is only about two-thirds the length of the French. So we need a new translation.
Well, yeah, Cliff Goldfarb has been doing some work on that
Mm.
actually. So I think,
It'd be great to see that done properly, and then we'll be able to have Nordon properly.
yeah, I think so. I mean, I had Nordon, Lysett, and Owen Dudley Edwards as
Mm.
my kind of top three. I would say some honourable mentions. I think Teller of Tales as an introductory
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
one is brilliant because Daniel Stashauer does a really good job of very lightly introducing Conan Doyle's literary works and how they connect to his life.
Mm.
The other one that I threw in, and this is a bit of a wild card, is Le Monde, because it was
Mm.
the first biography,
Mm.
first one, and it's written under very different circumstances, and it's seeing him as a spiritualist prophet. So I read Le Monde every now and then for the simple reason that it resets my expectations around Conan Doyle, in
Mm.
that, you stop seeing him as the literary figure we've come to know him and
Mm.
actually as the figure that perhaps he wanted to be seen as, or certainly how his
Mm.
widow wanted him to be seen. Um, and yet that is a massively problematic biography.
Mm. Mm.
But as an insight into the man and a different way of approaching the topic, I think Le Monde's quite an interesting one too.
Mm. And it is, as you say, it's written by a disciple,
Yeah,
essentially. Mm.
exactly. And so
Mm.
your top scholar is Owen Dudley Edwards,
Mhm.
and mine is Richard Lancelyn Green.
I would obviously put Richard very close, but I would be very close behind, and I'd kind of put them on up because they're from different aspects as well. I think if you like sort of Owen for Doylean and Richard for Sherlockian stroke Doylean.
Yeah, I think so. And
Mm.
the thing that always amazes me about Richard Lancelyn Green is that almost every time I've gone into an archive and I've found something and I thought, wow,
Mm.
I've not read that before. I go back and check, and Richard's
Mm.
written something on it.
Mm.
And I think he had the capacity to work across all aspects of Conan Doyle's life. I've been tripped up so many times
Mm.
into thinking that I've actually discovered something.
Mhm.
In fact, he got me there first.
Mm.
That, begrudgingly, I will say Richard Lancelyn Green
Mm.
is my favorite scholar.
Oh, it's I mean, to come back to biography, it is, to me, one of the many losses that we got with when Richard died was the fact that he always had an ambition to do a three-volume
Mm,
comprehensive biography of Doyle, which would have, again, that would have been a major
that would
cornerstone
have been, wouldn't
if
it?
it happened. That would have been the indispensable biography.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the best autobiographies, but
Uh-oh.
here's the fun answer. Here's the fun question. Worst, or the ones to avoid. So shall I give you a few of mine?
Yeah.
The ones that really wind me up. Corin,
Hmm.
because it says absolutely nothing new. It's complete hack journalism and contributes zero. I would say Pearson,
Hmm.
because that's completely that's vapid as well. And Charles Hyam.
Hmm.
And we've got a question on Charles Hyam, which I'll come back to in a second. But Charles Hyam, as much as it is quite fun to read, my goodness, is it littered with some quite amazing statements too. So anyway, those are my three serious offenders. What about yours?
Well, my top offender, and anyone who looks around our website will find my review of this book, The Strange Case of Dr. Doyle by Daniel and Eugene Friedman,
Mm,
which it's not a full biography. They have a particular point to push, but the biographical elements, it's just riddled with inaccuracies. It's riddled with disinformation. It's a
yeah,
mischievous book.
yeah,
It's a book which is actually very damaging. It's a book that should never have been published, in my
mm,
view. And its basic thing is, and I'm not going to be giving it away by this, is that Conan Doyle was Jack the Ripper,
yes,
and it's just nonsense. It's just offensive. But it's more offensive as well, additionally offensive by the fact that there's so many inaccuracies and so much deliberate misreading,
Yeah, yeah,
that it's a harmful book.
yeah.
Um,
I know that when it came out, a few months after it came out, I Googled Arthur Conan Doyle, and the fourth result that it was recommending was Arthur Conan Doyle Jack the Ripper.
mm,
And so actually these things do have consequences, I think,
yeah.
because God knows what AI is now making of it, but there you go.
Mm.
So yeah,
Well,
so that's a
they weren't the first as well because I've forgotten the author's name, but there was a terrible book, another one called Ripper Suspect,
oh yes,
looking at Montague John Druitt,
yes,
and that also it tries to push a double line that it was Druitt. Oh, but it was also Conan Doyle,
yeah,
and
that's right,
again, full of inaccuracies. It's terrible.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
these books should not get published. It's even more offensive, really, that they're both quite nicely produced books. So it just has that gives them the air
mm, mm,
of some degree of authenticity. But yeah, so there's that one. As you said with the Koran, just and again the Koran was just full of inaccuracies and until
yes,
Richard Lancelyn Green did a wonderful demolition job on
yes,
it.
he did.
For the paperback, suddenly everything Richard had said appeared.
Mm.
Another one that you haven't mentioned is Ronald Pearsall.
Oh gosh, yeah,
Again, from a journalistic perspective, just not worth considering. I mean, a lot of Pearsall's books. He did a book on quite a hefty book called "The Worm in the Bud" on Victorian sexuality, and that's another. It's just laden with inaccuracy and hackwork. And I think as Owen said about Pearsall's book on Conan Doyle that it's a book that tries to convince you that the writer, the biographer, is more important than their subject,
yeah,
but he fails in
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So it's again one to avoid. I mean, I'm a bit kinder about Pearson than you. I do enjoy the Hesketh Pearson, but again, you've just got to treat it with total caution. And here's the central thesis, which Pearsall just copies Pearson in many ways.
Yes,
Is this idea that Conan Doyle was the man in the street, which so offended Adrian Conan Doyle. That's
absolutely.
probably the one good thing.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, that's and there's another more recent book with Arthur Conan Doyle Beyond Sherlock Holmes by Dr. Andrew Norman,
Oh
which I
yes.
wouldn't recommend at all. There's some very peculiar theorizing about Charles Altamont Doyle
Oh
in it.
yes.
Again, some real howlers. There's one point which is one of the asides when Holmes recommends to Watson, read your Jean Paul, meaning Jean Paul Richter. And we have a note almost saying this is Jean Paul Sartre. Slight
Oh
historical
dear.
clash there.
A bit of a problem there.
And that I'm sad to say wasn't even picked up for the paperback reprint.
Oh dear. Okay.
So just that carelessness, sloppiness. So yeah,
Mm.
but
So on Hyam, we had a question from Basil Chap via email saying, "What's your favourite unsubstantiated claim from Charles Hyam's biography?" He says, "Mine is his casual anecdote about how the Gillette play had originally a different ending that was only used in the French translation, and that Doyle later copied it for The Empty House." Well, yeah, that's kind of like the starting point of this. I think the thing I find quite offensive about Hyam is that he goes overboard with this kind of um, recreating how Conan Doyle felt at a particular times in his life in a way that is pretty much impossible. And I was looking through it the other day. One that leapt out to me is when Conan Doyle in 1914 went to Coney Island. And Hyam writes, like a big schoolboy, he rode the scenic railway, absorbed the dips and drops, roared happily at the shoots, had his fortune told, went by trolley to the end of Steeplechase Park, strolled along the Bowery, and nibbled frankfurters, and stood rigidly to attention as a brass band played the British and American national anthems, and the crowd cheered him lustily. He revelled in Crazy Village, with its tilting walls, unexpectedly sliding floors, and jiggling sidewalks. He sat solemnly on a bench in a little house as it turned upside down until he found himself sitting on the ceiling, and he wound up the evening watching the Maxiques and the one step performed by dozens of couples at the castle house under strings of multicolored fairy lights. And you know that what's happened is he's just gone to some description of Coney Island in 1914. got a bit of a newspaper report and then he's just mashed it into something. But I find Hyam irritating in the extreme because it's littered with that kind of nonsense.
And again, just inaccuracies.
Yeah.
Full of, I mean, just looking through a copy here, just things I've marked up on Study in Scarlet. Conan Doyle clearly plucked the address 3 Lauriston Gardens out of the air since it did not exist. It did exist, but in a different city.
Yeah, wrong
Again,
city.
that failure to understand that. We get another one with the first issue of The Strand. While at Devonshire Place that summer, Conan Doyle, in common with every other civilized person in London, became aware of a new presence on sitting room tables, The Strand magazine. Ah, that will be the magazine he's actually in, that issue with the voice of science. These aren't biographers or historians. They're journalists just doing work to order.
Yeah, that's right. Before we leave people with the impression that we are very down on other
Yes.
Doylean scholars, I should say that, I'm constantly amazed. We're constantly amazed, frankly, by the amount of new work that is coming
Mm,
out. And, it's not necessarily going to be, new books or new journal articles, but you get lots of small scholarship, micro scholarship, things like the Terror of Blue John Gap annotated version, which is being done by the ACD Society, or the little things that get posted on Facebook. Matt Hall has been posting some
mm.
interesting things that he's found, and you get all these little snippets that people are coming up with all the time, and so there's plenty of really good scholarship out there.
As I said to you there, with where I'd be less harsh to Hesketh Pearson than you. It is you can usually find something
Yeah, you can.
that these, but I mean, this is why I'm so harsh on Strange Case of Dr. Doyle, because that isn't just sloppiness. It's almost malicious.
Yeah, that's intent. That's different.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look. We've got a second set of questions here now, which is actually on Conan Doyle and his various careers,
Mm,
because one of the things that we often refer to is the fact that he had so many different aspects to his identity. That's one of the joys of studying him. But a question here from Mark Alberstadt, who's the editor of Canadian Homes, and we had him on the podcast way back in episode 7 to talk
mm.
about Conan Doyle in sport. And he asked a question: do you think Conan Doyle was a decent doctor? He missed the diagnosis of his first wife's illness. He also chucked in his medical practice as soon as he realized he could make a go of it as a writer. So I'm going to come a bit to Conan Doyle's defense on this one,
Mhm.
because if you take the case of tuberculosis in particular, in the 1870s and 80s, it was notoriously difficult to diagnose tuberculosis. And, the reason why there was such a flurry of interest around Koch's remedy, as it was believed, was because everybody was searching for an easier way of diagnosing tuberculosis. That was quite difficult. I think also we have to sort of get our heads into what it was like to be a doctor in that period of time. Um, this was an era before the NHS, so doctors were having to be self-promoters, they were having to be businessmen, they were doing voluntary work. There's a whole set of things around them. One of the interesting things to look at is A.J. Cronin writing 50 years later in The Citadel, the book that inspired the NHS. He describes a world of the general practitioner. It's not that different from what Conan Doyle was experiencing in the 1880s. So, I think the role of the doctor was really quite different at that time. We also, I think, have this view that Conan Doyle was not successful as a doctor, partly because he chucked it in. But when you look at the salary he earned, it's pretty reasonable for a provincial doctor of the 1880s. So I think he probably was okay. I think the key thing, though, is that medicine was not his passion. And the really interesting question is, why did medicine appear anyway? Because it's not in the Doylean line. It's not in the Foley line. And the obvious influence on Conan Doyle's choice of study was Brian Charles Waller.
Yeah, I mean, this is I've been thinking along similar lines myself with this question. I mean, I know very little about the medical world generally of the 19th century,
Mm,
and what I have learned is probably through studying Doyle.
yeah,
But you get the impression with it. I mean, he wasn't involved in any major mistakes or controversies
no,
in his
that's true.
medical. The only one he had was Jack Hawkins dying in Bush Villas when he was a resident patient there. But
Mm,
that I don't think you can just put that. You can't say that's down to Conan Doyle's incompetence. It's just he was a very, very ill person anyway, and it's unlikely he'd have been saved, whatever.
yeah.
And it's just Conan Doyle himself makes the point in Memories and Adventures. It's a good job another doctor was there,
Yeah,
really, because I think didn't he have a detective knocked on the
he
door?
did. He got
But
questioned.
fortunately, the other doctor was able to prove that there's no funny business.
Yeah,
So Doyle was never involved in any. He wasn't a quack. He'd worked with the quack of quacks with George Turnavine Budd.
mm,
But Doyle seems to have been quietly competent.
yeah, I think
It's
so.
the sense you get of this, and as you say, I'm interested in the fact that there was no medical history
Mm,
in the family. They're an artistic family, the
yeah,
Doyles. And all his uncles were in various ways going to the arts and the humanities. His own father had been almost put into civil service in Edinburgh, but was an artist by inclination.
absolutely.
So his own father had been pushed into a profession that he didn't really want to be in.
Yeah,
And then his Charles's brother Richard becomes very successful with Punch and various other publications. So that's in Doyle's background, and it is it's undoubtedly Waller
yeah,
is the one who's pushing for Arthur to do medicine. It's surprising actually he's as competent as he is, really,
yeah.
because it isn't a career choice for
That's
him.
right. Yeah,
That obviously the first chance he gets when he can become a writer, he does, that he seizes the opportunity. I think you can't really classify him as a bad doctor.
I think the thing that's harder to understand is why he wanted to become a specialist. I mean, there's obviously the
Mm,
money element to it.
mm,
There's a reason why the first episode of Doings of Doyle was the Doings of Raffles Hall, because we were
mm,
really interested in that kind of 6 month period when Conan Doyle decides he's going to chuck in his practice in Southsea. He's going to go to Vienna. He's going to come back and set up in specialist practice. And in that period of time, he writes the Doings of Raffles Hall. And the Doings of Raffles Hall pays for all his expenses for 3 months. And, he comes back, he sets up in practice. He then falls ill not very long after, while he's writing the first few Sherlock Holmes stories. It's an amazing period of time in his life. And I think the writing of the doings of Raffles Haw is more important the more I think about it, because he must have realized there was an easier life than this, and there's something that's more fulfilling
mm,
than slogging away trying to make this work. And I suspect, when we talk about the fact that he didn't have many patients when he was a specialist in London, it was probably quite half-hearted, to be perfectly honest, at that point, and he
mm,
could find another way of making an income that probably aligned
mm,
better to his interests and passions.
mm.
So,
I think we've also got to add here that we wouldn't have his greatest creation without his medical background
well, that's true.
because of the obvious influence of Joe Bell and the fact that Sherlock Holmes, the way he approaches things is in a very medical way. He is a
Yeah,
consulting detective. Even the
exactly.
phrasing is there, and the way these things are set up. It's the medical experience is central
Yeah.
to the creation of Holmes. So we've got Holmes has a medical sidekick. Holmes himself, we meet him in Barts, so he's
Yeah.
obviously got some background in medical research. It's all that, and what you look at the swan song of Holmes, the case book of Sherlock
Yes.
Holmes. It's there to the end,
It's
all
all
this
there.
medical referencing. So, say without that, we wouldn't have the character that we all love.
No, that's a good point.
Mm,
And that brings us nicely to our next question, which is from the patrons. It's, if Conan Doyle hadn't written the Holmes stories, do you think he would have eventually become famous
mm,
anyway? And if so, for what? And Mark Chatterton adds, if he'd become an MP, would he have been any good?
mm.
So there you go. What do you reckon?
Well, I think he'd have made it in writing,
Right.
whatever. I don't think he'd have been the central figure that without Holmes.
Mm,
I think he'd be very much in that sort of uh, late 19th, early 20th century group of writers that includes people like, say, Anthony Hope, Grant Allen, all of those. I think he'd be in that sort of world, and he would be remembered still. I'm quite sure he'd be remembered. I think he'd be remembered certainly alongside people like Arthur Machen and Algernon Blackwood as a superior
Yes.
producer of Gothic stories, because
Yes.
those stories they would have certainly survived and stood the test of time. But I don't think the other work would have, the historical stuff that he really, White Company, Sir Nigel, Micah Clarke, these would all have been produced,
Mm.
but they wouldn't have got him the reputation, that's for sure, that Holmes has, and
Yeah.
even Brigadier Gerard it wouldn't popular at the time, but it's not the sort of thing that would be lasting fame. I think the things that would have given him a degree of lasting fame would have been the horror stories, and
Yes.
he would definitely, without Holmes, he'd still be of interest to fans of genre fiction and the academic workers in this area now. So I think
Yeah.
he'd have been with us. We'd certainly have known about Conan Doyle, but I don't think he'd have had the platform. He wouldn't have had the platform in his life to
Well,
do all the campaigning he wanted without Holmes.
that's so I'm slightly more on the no side on this.
Mm,
I suspect he would be very much B or C list
mm,
in our writers. And that's not a reflection of his work, but I just
mm,
think that Sherlock Holmes earned him the platform
mm,
and the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal to go on and do a load of other things that basically made him very famous.
mm,
As well as Sherlock Holmes. I mean, it's really difficult to take Sherlock Holmes out of the picture because without Sherlock Holmes, you don't have the detective fiction boom of the 1890s. You don't have the transformation of short storytelling in quite the same way. But I do think Conan Doyle had a natural affinity with the short story form,
mm,
and as we've seen in all of the Gothic work that he wrote in the 1880s, before the real the arrival of the Strand, and he would have found something else to have fitted into that. Whether it had been as successful, I don't know. But I think I think there's so much of his life that was enabled by the success of Sherlock Holmes. It's quite hard to disconnect it. And he'd written
mm,
Micah Clarke before Sherlock Holmes, and that didn't really that earned him respect, but
mm,
it didn't earn him fame
mm,
in quite the same way. So I think I suspect he might not have done. But on that question of whether or not he'd be a good
mm,
MP, the thing is that he was trying to become an MP in the first decade, of the 20th century. It was a really turbulent time in British politics. It's the rise of the Labour Party, it's the decline of the Liberal Party. The party boundaries are very fluid. Two of the greatest leaders in 20th century are flipping between political parties, David Lloyd George,
mm,
Winston Churchill,
mm,
in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. It's a very fluid period of time. And irrespective of Conan Doyle's views, whether you agree with what he was putting forward on the stump or not, I think he was a very persuasive individual. I think he was also somebody who was serious about getting things done, and that I think is probably where he would have been quite successful as an MP. I think also going back to what we were saying earlier about him being a doctor, that probably puts him in quite good stead with his constituents.
mm. I think he would have actually been a good constituency MP
Yeah.
in terms that he was interested in people's lives. And I think he probably did have a good bedside manner
Yes.
as a doctor, and I think this would have been good stead as an MP. But I also think I think he'd have got bored of it. I think he'd have grown
Yeah.
bored of it very easily, and he certainly wouldn't have been a good party MP. He wouldn't have
No.
been able to toe a party line ever. So he'd
No.
be forever be in trouble with the whole the whipping system, and so he wouldn't be able to keep back his opinions. And that's where I think he'd have been a poor MP, but that's the system. He wouldn't have worked very well within the way the British system works,
Yes.
because he's too much of an individualist.
Yeah, he is. He is. I mean, if there's one period of time where you could be an individualist in British politics, it's probably the 1900s, 1910s. But
Yeah,
actually,
when you get, as you say, Churchill and Lloyd George and people like that, but they're the ones who are going to the top. Whereas
yeah, I don't think he
I
would have
don't
gone.
think Doyle would have gone to the top politically because he's doing too many other things as well.
Yeah, I think so.
And in a way, I look back at it and think it's a good job for him, really, that he didn't become an MP because he could actually achieve far more outside Parliament than he could have within.
On the plus side, you get a nice long summer break and you can play a lot of cricket.
Well,
So
yes.
he didn't have to drop that. So
And he could have joined some more teams, probably.
that's true. Yeah. There's probably a House of Commons team. Um, so another one from the patrons. What do you feel about him not naming his first wife in his autobiography?
Yeah, it's this is kind of what I was saying earlier about Memories and Adventures. It's a book you have to be very careful
Very
with.
careful.
You've got to, I mean, autobiography as a genre tends to be self-serving,
Yes.
obvious. And Doyle himself wrote in Through the Magic Door. As a race, we, i.e., the British or the English, are too afraid of giving ourselves away ever to produce a good autobiography.
Yeah.
And that's the key. Yeah, he actually understood it. I think he knew what he was doing with Memories and Adventures because it is so carefully
Yeah, it is.
edited or self-edited. Yeah, it is a bit bad that he doesn't mention Louise at all. But this is this is after he's married Jean Leckie, isn't it? So the family are looking in as well. So you've got that going on over his shoulder. You actually know Louise's surname
Yeah.
from earlier because you actually get a lady named Mrs. Hawkins, a widow of a Gloucestershire family, had come to Southsea with her son and daughter. The latter, a very gentle and amiable girl. So that's what you get as the
That's it.
background on Louise, and
Yeah.
it just it's symptomatic of Memories and Adventures. This is you're getting this constantly.
Yes, you are. And I think I would have expected there to be more in there personally, but I understand entirely why. Jean's influence, his second wife's influence, was pretty strong by the
Mm,
1920s in all sorts of ways, and it's very widely debated as to how manipulative she may have been.
mm,
She had a vested interest in promoting the second family as opposed to the first family. There's a lot. There's a lot going into that as well.
mm,
The question goes on. What else do you think he wrote which was out of character? I think when you look at his spiritualist writings, and basically from about 1922 onwards, I tend to view his writings much more skeptically and critically because we know he was self serving and we
mm,
know he started to manipulate how he presented information. We've used an example in the podcast before about the ghost hunt he went on
mm,
in his early days and how that was a tremendous failure at the time, but then it suddenly became this great encounter with a spirit in later retelling.
mm,
And I think there's also good evidence when we spoke to Merrick Barrow about the Cottingley fairies that Conan Doyle, I think, knew he was playing fast and loose with the truth towards the end of that. It didn't dissuade him from a view that fairies existed, but I think he was prepared to manipulate the situation and possibly the artifacts in pursuing his overall goal, which at that time was against the rationalist society.
mm,
And so, famously, we don't have the originals of the Cottingley fairies photographs. The only ones that exist are ones that were subject to further techniques to clean
mm.
them up and things like that. And you just don't know how much manipulation went into those things. So I think we know he can be incredibly selective in
Yeah.
in those things.
Yeah, this is the thing about being a very good writer. He knew how to use words and was clever with his phrasing.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned Brian Charles Waller, and the only mention of him in Memories and Adventures is very oblique. Says, my mother had adopted the device of sharing a large house, which may have eased her in some ways, but was disastrous in
Yeah,
others. So
indeed.
there's a lot being said there in a very hidden sentence. So the whole world in that one sentence. And then come back to Jean Leckie. It's interesting the way he talks about her in Memories and Adventures. On September the 18th, 1907, I married Miss Jean Leckie, the younger daughter of a Blackheath family whom I had known for years, and who was a dear friend of my mother and sister,
Yeah,
which
yes,
makes it
quite.
sound like almost like he's been introduced to Jean Leckie
Exactly.
by his mother and sister. It's this very careful and clever use of words that's going on there, and yeah, he'd really mastered it by this point. As you say, in the 20s, you're getting a lot of that going on, and also he becomes very almost pig-headed
Yeah.
in his approach and very didactic and polemic,
Yeah.
and which he wasn't in his younger day. He enjoyed he enjoyed the give and take
Yes.
of debate. And in the 20s, that's really it's lessening, and there's a real sense of I'm right and everyone else is wrong, and as you said with the Cottony fairies, he doesn't try and get himself out of a hole. He digs himself in deeper
Yeah, he does.
constantly.
Yeah, he does.
And it's difficult to read some of this stuff
It is.
as an admirer of Doyle,
Yeah,
because you kind of think there would have been a better approach you could have taken, the less didactic, the less polemic, the less confrontational.
hmm. Maybe not on the fairies, but
Well, no,
maybe not to hiding to nothing with
no, I
that one.
don't think. No, I think he was on a hiding to nothing with that one from the start, and would have been well advised to stay clear.
So this discussion connects to another question, which was from Joanne Alberstadt, the
Mm.
co-editor of Canadian Homes with Mark, and she asks, "How did Conan Doyle and his inner circle use the media to shape Conan Doyle's image?" Now, in his lifetime, I think Conan Doyle was in control of his own image.
Mm.
He is prolific in his letter writing to the press. You know, this is a man
Mm.
who is using the media constantly, particularly after 1900, to push his views. And so, you know, in many ways, he's mediating his own image by the correspondence that he has with press. And, you know, Richard Lancelyn Green did that wonderful book Letters
Yes,
with
I was
Gibson
just
Green,
going
I
to
think.
say that's one we should have mentioned earlier, really.
Yeah, it's very
Mm.
good, that one, where he
Mm.
collects all of letters to the press, isn't it?
Mm.
And 1924, when he gets to write Memories and Adventures, he's definitely doing a lot of
Mm.
um, reverse engineering on his
Mm.
backstory to really present a particular view. And but what's really interesting is what happens after 1930, after his death, because there you get another phase of this image and control, which largely sits around, well, for 10 years sits around Gene Leckie, and
Mm.
then after that is really around Adrian and how they decide to cultivate a particular image, which
Mm.
means downplaying certain aspects, upplaying others. You know, notably, you know, Conan Doyle was Sherlock Holmes, being
Mm.
one of Adrian's great things.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so yeah, so I think there's a difference between the kind of, you know, 1924 is maybe a marker, but certainly 1930
Mm.
after he's died.
Mm. Well, like you said, in his lifetime, I mean, from an early stage, he was very conscious of image. He's a very photographed man, from a young age. I mean, the physical side, he's always well dressed.
Mm,
In photographs, always well presented. We know the story of the moustache, that he grew that to look older as a
yes.
doctor. But that became a strong part of his image, because it was kind of the kind of Englishman personified. It's
Mm,
this Scots Irishman reinventing himself as an Englishman, and wearing, looking like an English army officer,
yeah. Yeah.
more than a writer. And you think of him and Lord Kitchener both had this kind of the kind of cultivated image with the large moustache, and
Yeah.
it's easily used, as as with the Kitchener poster. It's all that kind of thing. And Doyle was the same. He knew about photography. He'd been a photographer. So he knew about the power of photography and the power, how the media was working. He's there with the Strand magazine. He knows that's a good magazine to be. He's on the wave
Mm,
with this, and understands the way. He understands the magazine world very well,
yeah.
and how to push himself in that. He gets himself interviewed in with the Idler, with the
Yes.
Robert Barr
Yeah.
interview,
Yeah.
with all the photographs. Conan Doyle at home, very Hello magazine.
Absolutely.
In
Yeah.
that, so he really understands all of that. Loves technology. Will
Yeah.
bring. Likes to present himself as a lover of technology, or with the motor cars. He's there. He's up in an airplane, a balloon.
Yeah.
Action
Yeah.
man all the way as well. Which is again tying in with his going out to the Sudan and the Boer War. I'm a man of action, and he really was very good at using the press. Very on the ball with
Mm,
all of this, and a very this is again what makes him modern.
yeah.
And where we're talking about how he's managed, his image has managed to survive. Most people will not be able to conjure up an image of Jerome K. Jerome.
No,
for
true.
instance, in the head. But so him, straight away. Conan Doyle, oh yeah, the moustache, and
Yeah,
it's
that's
it's
right.
it's it's there. And yeah, I do agree with you that later on the thing changes, and Adrian is Gene Leckie is pushing. It's still the spiritualist side
Yeah, it is.
is important, but once Gene Leckie's died, Adrian comes in. Again, we get Sherlock
Yep,
really coming to the fore because Adrian knows he can monetize this.
exactly. It's money at that point.
You've got that image, and that's the idea of pushing his father as Sherlock Holmes, and Adrian himself was a good manipulator of the media,
Mm,
but he, unlike his father, he didn't have the gift of coming across as a likable person.
yes. Yeah, it's true.
Mm,
It's true. And you mentioned there about Gene and pushing the spiritualist angle. We've got a set of questions now which relate
mm,
to spiritualism. And it's a topic that I think it's fair to say we haven't really explored hugely on
mm,
the podcast. It's a very difficult issue, and of course we've been focused mostly on his literary work, but we
mm,
do also cover his non-fiction too. And I think spiritualism is an area that we have yet to really delve into. For my part, it's because I feel very uncomfortable about it because I don't really understand it in quite the same depth as I do his literary work and the context, the wider context around it. Um, but I think there's some really interesting questions here that I think we can answer
mm.
about this, and one from Ray Betzner, who is a great Vincent Starrett scholar. If you haven't read Studies in Starrett, his blog, you should really go and have a look at that. Ray asks, how did Conan Doyle reconcile spiritualism with science? I've read his discourses on the subject and still can't understand how he believed that spiritualism could be proven scientifically. What am I missing? And he warns us that we only have an hour in which to answer the question. Um, so, for my part, I think the challenge here is to get into Conan Doyle's mindset.
Mm,
And this, to me, goes back to his education in the 1870s and 80s. If you think about that period of time, lots of things that had been theorized were suddenly being proven. So X-rays, the bacillus, being able to actually see germs under the microscope. You were getting new forms of photography. You're getting wireless telegraphy. These things that were invisible were becoming visible. Kind of intangible were becoming tangible. And I think that shapes the mindset of not just Conan Doyle, but many people around that time, that actually they're on the edge of great scientific discovery, and that things that had only been thought possible before would eventually be discovered through scientific inquiry. And so that, I think, plays very much into his core mindset. The interesting thing happens in the 1920s, and you just alluded to it, Paul, which is that actually he becomes very dogmatic. And so when you look at things like The Lost World, which we covered, he is really making some very strong statements there about scientific orthodoxy. Who gets to choose that something is scientifically valid and what gets accepted as being evidence? And in the 1920s, he really hardens his line. And in fact, he what started as being, you know, we need to be open to these experiences suddenly becomes rather closed. He's starting to say science is diametrically opposed to this. The way in which people are thinking about this is inherently closed-minded. Actually, he's becoming very
mm,
close-minded to the fact that these things can't be proven. I think the other thing that plays into it though is that Conan Doyle's idea of spiritualism is very mixed up with other things as well, these
mhm,
esoteric religions, theosophy. And when you look right, as we've done, we covered the Maracot Deep, his last novel, that's a complete confusion of spiritualism and theosophy and all. It's a whole grab bag of different things that, Atlantis, the theories
mhm,
of Atlantis, which he'd written on, sort of supporting the idea of Atlantis having once been a real continent. There's a whole grab bag of things that he brings in. So I don't think he really saw it as being a difference between the two, but he starts to change his way of talking about this stuff in the 1920s, which becomes very self-serving. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot in that, Mark. Quite definitely. It's it is a difficult topic, and it's one that you have to realize. I mean, we've discussed this on the podcast a few times. That this does go way back. You know, when you get this kind of uninformed. opinion on Doyle that he suddenly turned into a spiritualist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And doesn't take into the account what you've just been talking about there. You're going back to the 1880s and his experiments in theosophy. He was an early member of the Society for Psychical Research. He
Yeah.
was interested in he was on the fringes of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Never actually joined, but he was on the fringes and knew people in that world. He was always very interested in that world, and it's um, constantly said, and this is a view that I agree with. That he's brought up by the Jesuits. He's brought up in this very Catholic background at Stonyhurst, and when he rejects that, he's not somebody who can just not believe.
Yeah.
So a lot of his life is a quest for spiritual satisfaction of one
Yes.
kind or another. Um, and he never, I mean, he never entirely rejected the faith of his youth, really.
No, he
And
didn't.
you read some of the spiritualist stuff, he's constantly talking about God.
Yeah, he is.
So he does tie Christianity and spiritualism together.
Yeah.
And as you say, he throws all kinds of things into the mix. Um, and to come to Ray's question, I'll come back to Ray's question about the scientific aspect. He genuinely believed you could study spiritualism in a scientific
Mm.
way through watching mediums and seances and so on. Here is physical evidence.
Mm.
And obviously the problems with that with Houdini, who knew exactly how you could produce all these things.
Yeah.
So all that is getting mixed in, and it's this. I think the kickback he gets is what helps to turn him didactic as well. There's so much opposition. His mind closes up a bit, and he takes personal. I think he takes it as a personal affront sometimes
Yes, he does.
with people like Father Thurston
Yeah, he
or Edwin
definitely
Ray
does.
Lancaster. He takes this all very personally, and that helps to make him the man he becomes in the 20s with the very dogmatic views.
Yeah.
He is trying to turn it into something logical,
Mm.
but I always come back to the thing that it's Challenger he turns into the spiritualist.
Yeah, it is.
The rational, logical thinking Sherlock Holmes he never
You
could or
can't turn
did,
him.
because he knows it just wouldn't work. So there's that side going on as well. So it is this it is a fascinating mix.
He is. I think there's a lot of pragmatism in it as well. I mean,
Mm,
it sounds
mm.
strange to say, but I think, things like, why did he not turn Sherlock Holmes? That was pragmatic. He knew that.
Oh, that
Yeah,
people wouldn't accept it.
exactly.
But I think he also, as a writer, knew in his own mind, I can't do this to
It's
this
just not.
character because
Yeah.
it's wrong.
It's
Whereas Challenger, because as you pointed out in the Lost World, Challenger is a scientist, but he's also challenging scientific
yeah,
orthodoxy constantly. The Challenger is the perfect character
that's right.
to
Yeah.
use for this sort of propagandizing later on.
So there's a follow-on question here, which comes from the patrons as well, is do you find Conan Doyle's spiritualist writings incredulous, or do you think they're still worthy of study to gain an insight into his mind?
It's a difficult question because I find them difficult to tackle.
Mm.
The actual works themselves, the vital message, and I can't. I find them very very difficult to read.
Yeah.
Is the answer to that from me.
Yeah.
His where he's talking about this in fiction, I'm far more at my ease with.
Yes.
And I don't think I could tackle Phineas Speaks. I think it would just be beyond me to be able to, even from a research perspective,
Yeah, it's
I
very
think I would
difficult.
find it difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I think I find some of them quite fascinating for the simple
Mhm.
reason that he's an incredibly persuasive writer.
Mm,
That doesn't mean that, you will read it and you'll be converted because, it's just not how it works. But he has an ability to marshal an argument and to present a case in a way that is compelling.
mm,
And so when you read through some of these works, I do think they are instructive in
mm,
terms of how his mind works, how he puts together arguments. There's lots of similarities between, say, The Wanderings of a Spiritualist and Crimes of the Congo in the sense of
mm,
how he marshals evidence
mm,
and presentation. They're also quite interesting from a travelogue point of view, a lot of those later ones too. And Andrew Lycett did a very good job of extracting the sort of the
mm,
travelogue side of things. But so I think they're difficult for us to engage with, but they are still worthy of Um, Still worthy of study from my point of view. I am trying hard to kind of get a bit more of a context around this because one of the things that I find quite interesting, the more I've read into spiritualism in the last couple of years, is that Conan Doyle, in his public life, in his campaigning, in his writing, is often seen as maybe not the pioneer, but somebody who's a great popularizer and at the forefront of great movements. In spiritualism, he doesn't seem to be. He seems to be an advocate and a prophet, if you want to put it in those kind of terms. But actually, there's a much bigger hinterland there of other people who've been doing things for a lot longer.
Mm, mm.
And so he is, in a strange way, not as special in that world the more I've dug into it. But I appreciate that's a very superficial opinion because I'm still at the beginning of my
Mm.
journey into Conan Doyle and spiritualism.
But one of the things that he is good at with this, compared to some of the other people you've been mentioning and some of the SPR people,
Mm.
is he doesn't get lost in jargon.
No,
That
that's
is
true.
whereas a lot of the others, they've invented a new kind of pseudo-scientific vocabulary,
Yeah.
which makes reading a lot of these sort of books very difficult. I mean, it's even worse when you go into occultism. But when you're getting into the more scientific side of exploring the spirit world and so, you do get a lot of them have this jargon, which Doyle doesn't do. He doesn't
No.
alter his books up with that because as a good writer, he knows he's trying to reach an audience, a general audience. This is the way to do it. The moment you start putting in lots of jargon, you turn people straight off.
Yeah, that's right.
And he knows to avoid that. But the thing again that comes in is when you talk about all the grab bag.
Yeah.
And this is where there's a real problem as well with him because this is where the Cottingley thing gets mixed in
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and he mixes that up with spiritualism, with a lot,
Yeah.
which a lot of spiritualists will have thought, oh, no,
Exactly.
we're nothing to do with this. And again, that's mixing it with Gardner was a theosophist.
Yeah.
So it's getting a lot of things confused. And I remember when we were talking to Merrick Burrow, I think he had a very interesting kind of thesis that spiritualism really begins in 1848 with the Fox sisters,
Mm.
and the popular ends with the Cottingley fairies. That Conan
That's right.
Doyle is helpful in destroying
In killing
spiritualism,
it. That's right.
unfortunately, by getting involved in this thing, which an awful lot of spiritualists wouldn't have wanted to be involved with because it isn't anything to do with
No,
them.
it isn't.
But Doyle, kind of just
He conflates
clumps
it.
in.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got a question here, which I'm amazed we've got a question here from Bert Cools, who wrote and I think produced the fantastic BBC radio series with Clive Merrison, Sherlock Holmes series. Fantastic. Anyway, Bert writes, there was an article in The Collector which concludes with the observation that Conan Doyle died in 1930 from a heart attack, quote, with his last notes expressing a concealed yet evident hint of doubt in his lifelong beliefs. Is there any basis for this claim? Now, I don't think there is. I have yet to be able to find anything that really substantiates this, and I would be really surprised if it was true for a few reasons. One of them is that we've seen Conan Doyle's will, and he gave quite extensively to spiritualist charities. He also, in the months before his death, was giving lots of interviews where he basically said, "I'm not long for this world." So he had a sense that he was dying, and so arguably, if in that period of time he felt, he was turning away from the spiritualist cause or he had doubts, you would have thought he might have made
Mm.
changes in his will at that point. He was also buried in a spiritualist ceremony. So I think it's highly unlikely that he had those doubts. But there is one thing that does really interest me about this, which is the change to the last chapter in Memories and Adventures. Because the 1924 and the 1930 edition have got a different final chapter. And in the final chapter, there is a lot less about the spiritualist campaign. And there is almost a sense in which that second edition he is trying to, again, going back to Joanne's question earlier, shape his image and his legacy. And so that is the only thing that gives me a sense that perhaps he was having second thoughts.
I've certainly never heard or read anything along those lines. As you say, Mark, it would surely have been obvious. He's still up to the end. He's still fighting his critics.
Mm.
supporting spiritualism. Has this big fallout with the SPR
Yeah.
right near the end. So there's all the actual evidence of what he did.
Yeah.
It doesn't support that thing, and you vague phrases about last notes and so on. You need footnoting and
Yeah.
sources for this. It's just it's not good enough. And it is interesting with you go back to Memories and Adventures, the 1924. The last chapter starts with, I have not obtruded the psychic question upon the reader,
Mhm.
though it has grown in importance with the years and has now come to absorb the whole energy of my life. I cannot, however, close these scattered memories of my adventures in thought and action without some reference, however incomplete, to that which has been far the most important thing in my life. So there's two things going on there.
Mm.
I have not obtruded this on the reader.
Yeah.
I've not turned you off my book
Yeah.
earlier, but I'm going to get a bit in at the end. But he's very, very strong there, and I don't. I've seen no evidence that he changed his views on that strong support,
No.
and I think he genuinely did believe that.
Yeah. I think so.
And we know, as we've been talking about throughout this, that he's on a quest through his life for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a question from Timu Oman as well, which is what do we know about his friends, family, colleagues, and publishers' views about his spiritualism? Now, I've got an interesting first-hand piece of evidence on this, which I think about a year ago, 2 years ago, I was lucky enough to spend some time in the Library of Congress, and I looked at the archives of Doubleday, the publishers.
Mm.
There's an interesting exchange with them about the US publication of Phineas Speaks,
Mm.
where Conan Doyle is saying, you should really print this. And the publishers are basically saying politely no. But there's a kind of internal note as well that goes alongside it that says, this is going to be really damaging to the old man's reputation. We really should protect him, and let's just do the minimum that we can to basically get by. And he's done enough basically for us in other terms. At this point, they
Mhm.
were creaming in money on the Sherlock Holmes stories as well. So you might look at it cynically and think, well, maybe this was just protecting their commercial asset in Sherlock Holmes. I think by that time, Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes were so separate as entities that actually Sherlock Holmes had a life of its own by then
Mm.
anyway.
Mm.
And no matter what Conan Doyle said, Sherlock Holmes was going to sell. So
Mm.
I don't think it was that. But it is interesting that you get, in that case, from a US publisher, I think a reticence, but a kind of respect for Conan Doyle and a desire not to upset him and just to be very polite about this and just to... So you start to see that in other letters as well. You start to see that in other things too. Family, of course, we've talked a bit about
Mm.
with Jean. But I think it is interesting that the moment that Jean is out of the way, basically all that disappears very, very quickly
Mm.
with Dennis and Adrian.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the sons were just almost anything for a peaceful life
Yeah.
attitude there, and we'll just nod our heads and go along with this, and then your father will still keep buying us racing cars and things like that. I think there's an element in there, and a kind of, yeah, I know I'm being very mean about Adrian, in that, but I do think there was some sort of filial loyalty.
Oh, yes.
So that's in it. It's not all cynical with Adrian. I think
No.
there's a genuine uh, admiration of his father and what his father did, and maybe that there is that kind of respectful thing with the spiritualism. Well, that means so much to him. Let's be polite about it. Let's, we won't rock the boat. We won't say, oh, this is a load of nonsense. We'll go along with it, and we will support him in this. And then same with their mother. But other friends, I mean, we've talked about, the break with people like Lancaster and a lot
Hmm.
of the writers. Oh, this isn't
Too much.
the Arthur we used to know. Please just rein it in a little bit.
Well, one of the people that you're very interested in at the minute, Hugh Walpole, there's
Mm.
the wonderful quote from Hugh Walpole about the
Oh
fact
yes.
on Conan Doyle's death, saying, oh, he tried so hard to convert me, but what a
Mm.
lovely man.
But on that day, say, I feel very close to him today.
Yeah,
On the day, so
yeah,
there is that side of thing, and I think there is a tolerance amongst people towards it. No, it's the people who attack him are those. It's in the realms of religion and science
yeah,
who are defending their own corner.
yeah, that's right.
That's where some of the nasty spats come in. But I also think, yeah, with that bit I've just read out from the final chapter of Memories and Adventures, you almost feel, was there a discussion with John Murray?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll let
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
in, but don't dominate the book with it, please.
Yes.
Can we just have this as a story of your life?
Yes. Yeah.
And just leave that. Yeah, yeah, we don't mind you putting it in, but can we save it for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
last chapter, and don't make it a book about my spiritualist journey. Make it a memories and adventures, and this is what the readers want. So
Yes.
that's all going on, I'm quite sure,
Yeah.
in the background.
So coming back to the great cash cow that is Sherlock Holmes, we've got a question here from the patrons. Has the time come to stop pretending Watson wrote the Holmes stories and focus on the Doylean angle? What aspects of the Sherlockian game do
Mhm.
you like and which irk you? I'm going to pass that to you first, Paul.
Thank you. I think we are now getting to the point where Doylean scholarship is beginning to come into its own.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I mean, it's always a difficult one because you cannot separate the two, or because Sherlock Holmes is a central part of the Doylean canon.
Yeah.
So you've got to, but it is this the opening up of the hinterland.
Yeah.
I think as we've discussed before, this began in the early 80s with Owen Dudley Edwards and Richard Lancelyn Green
Yeah. Yeah.
really pushing from that perspective, and both also acknowledging, as we do all the time, we all love Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
We're not trying to do Sherlock Holmes down because Sherlock Holmes is brilliant and we love Sherlock, but we also want to say, look, the guy who created Sherlock Holmes did all this other wonderful, really interesting stuff as well. He
Yeah.
wrote all these, he created all these other characters. He wrote all these other wonderful stories, and he did a lot in his lifetime. Did,
Yeah. That's
all
right.
sorts of spheres that are interesting, and there is more to him than Sherlock Holmes. But Sherlock Holmes is always going to be central because,
Yes.
as we discussed earlier, without Sherlock Holmes, he wouldn't have been able to do this other stuff. Certainly not at the level that he got to. But yes, we do need more of the Doylean scholarship now. There's areas that need expanding on. What we need as a central issue is we need. We've got the chronology, we've got the bibliography. We need more letters.
Yeah.
We need a really good. You look at Robert Louis Stevenson. There's the multi-volume
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
letters. I mean, it's going to be more difficult with Doyle because, as we will shortly discuss, probably there's probably less available.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, I think on that specifics of the Sherlockian game, I've enjoyed reading that stuff. But the Sherlockian game has gone through phases as well. I mean, I think you've got to remember when it started, it was completely light-hearted and off the cuff, and it was very much in a kind of joyous, self-referential
Mm.
way. I think there was a period in the kind of 70s and 80s, maybe, where it suddenly became a bit, my perception of it suddenly became a bit hardcore. In that people were kind of policing this almost to some
Mm.
extent. And then I think in the last 20, 30 years, it's much more playful. We often in the podcast will stray between those kind of things. The Sherlock Holmes stories are so rich that they invite you to inhabit that world in such a way that you can be very playful with it. So I think there is a place for having a very fun approach to the Sherlock Holmes scholarship, but I wouldn't like to see that to the detriment of understanding more about Conan Doyle's role
Mm.
in creating it. In terms of aspects of the game that you like and that irk you, I actually love the light-hearted stuff. I think there's a lot of very funny stuff that's
Mm.
written in this mode, but the moment you get to railway timetables,
Mm.
I'm out.
Mm.
That's me
Mm.
done. I can't
Well,
cope with
it's
railway
yeah.
timetables, and that's for Agatha Christie as well.
I mean, I thoroughly agree. The early stuff, and I particularly with studies in the literature of Sherlock Holmes by Ronald Knox.
Yeah,
It's a very clever piece. He's poking fun at theology and biblical
biblical
exegesis,
scholarship.
and it's aimed at a certain audience who will really get it. But
Yeah,
it's fun to read anyway because you can see all the you can see what's being sent up in terms of academia and so on, but sent up in a very loving way.
absolutely.
It's not a vicious attack at all. It is Knox, the enormously clever Ronald Knox, just having fun. This is a man who who was a Catholic priest, who was a crime novelist as well. Um, he knew what he was talking about, and he knew exactly how to pitch it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that stuff is great. And some of the other earlier stuff, My Dear Homes and Gavin Brand and Baker
Yeah.
Street Byways, these wonderful little books that were produced. They're still worth reading today.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they're beautifully written. Most of them by people who can really write, and obviously Vincent Starrett and Christopher Morley and all
Yeah.
these they're really good quality writers who are, as you said, having fun. And it is when it all gets too serious, and as you say, with the Brower times and chronologies. That's the one that irks me. Chronology.
Chronology.
That's where the aspect of the game that probably annoys me more than any other. Because it's denying literature in its way. It's denying what's actually going on with these, and I lose patience, I'm
Yes.
afraid.
Well, there you go. I mean, the key matter is each to their own, really.
Mm-mm.
So there's another question here, which is about what does Doylean scholarship need the most, and what aspect of Conan Doyle's life or works is still to be written. Now, you touched on something that is very dear to my heart, which is this question about letters.
Mm.
And I think, you know, this ties into another question here, which is how much damage did Adrian do to his father's legacy? I think they all tie together here. One of the things that has really hurt Conan Doyle, probably more than anything else, and certainly I think impacted his status as a writer, is the fact that his papers have been scattered to the four winds. And while we have brilliant collections in different parts of the world, beautifully curated and looked after, and we also have wonderful private collectors who are very generous with the resources that they've acquired and sharing them. Nevertheless, they are spread everywhere.
Mm.
And, that makes it really hard sometimes to get on top of Conan Doyle's life and work. Now, there is great hope in that because, of course, with increasing digitization of resources, things are becoming more available all the time.
Mm.
Toronto Public Library have digitized all of the letters in their collection that are between Conan Doyle and Greenhouse Smith. So that's an amazing
Mm.
resource. And this will continue, and we will be able to start plugging these gaps electronically to some extent. But I think part of the problem for Conan Doyle is that there was never really the center of gravity around his papers and his letters in the way that you described, Stevenson's Book of
Mm.
Letters. And, and if you take Life in Letters, for example, which is really drawing on the ones that are in the British Library, there are, I go to that book all the time, but there are problems with that book.
Mm.
There are omissions, there are, the ellipses are a bit, questionable at times.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
I've found I always go in and look at the letters with my copy of Life in Letters, and sometimes I found discrepancies. And there was lots of hard work that went into publishing it, but you do wonder sometimes if that's a question of omission, selection,
Mm.
deletion for political purposes.
Mm.
And probably the area of his life and work that's to be written, I think we haven't really touched on things like his poetry or his plays. I think those are areas of his work that are really not studied very much. And we've only touched on them very briefly and often in passing in the podcast. But those are aspects of his work that I think are really not looked into very much at all.
There's thematic approaches that can be taken. There's you look into all the different genres he wrote in, and kind of deep dives
Mm,
into those worlds as really high quality monographs. We could do with a lot of that as well. And I still think we're not quite there with biography yet.
yeah,
We've got, as I say, Lycett's biography is a good solid piece of work and extremely useful and something that we both refer to all the time. We could possibly do with as more work is done on Doyle, in
yeah,
both in terms of studying his work and also things that might appear, and as you say, if the letters have become more available. But it's building on a lot of damage that's been done over the years. This there's no two ways about it. The damage that Adrian really began, selling stuff off, becoming curator in chief,
yeah.
with very much with an agenda.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is a problem, and where he closed the archive so many years, and then when I first became involved in this world in the mid 90s, we had this whole thing about, oh, there is an archive out there once the legal problems have got over.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
legal problems were, but the archive was sold off,
yeah, yeah,
so it's scattered to the four winds.
yeah,
So this is all it's problematic, and Doyle scholarship has suffered
yeah. It
more than
has.
most, I think, from this sort of behaviour. And also, I mean, I'm sure the Doyle estate isn't alone in this at
Mm,
all. But I don't think we're ever going to see letters between Arthur and Jean Leckie.
no.
I think they've gone.
Yeah, that's right.
But this happened with Dickens as well. Dickens did his own, he destroyed his own correspondence very thoroughly in that way.
Yeah.
So it's not that is not a problem that's unique to Conan Doyle. But the problem is that even if the people who did, if they've been destroyed, and the people who did destroy them did it in all good faith, as it were,
Mm,
the problem is they've opened the door to speculation. And
that's right.
speculation will always be worse.
Yeah.
What people can think about will always be worse than what actually happened. So you've got all this, you're perpetuating nonsense
Yeah.
and speculation that has no actual evidential backup.
Yeah. That's
And
right.
that will be a constant feature of works on Doyle forever. I think
Yeah.
because the other thing that's always going to be there with the Sherlock Holmes thing is there's money to be made
Yeah.
on
That's
the
right.
back of Sherlock Holmes for so many people, and that will always come in. And so sensationalism will
Yeah.
always up scholarship.
Yeah. 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 I agree.
Mm,
So I think we're getting really close on time. We've probably gone
mm,
way over, but we're gonna zip to a final question. And that's one from Anna Berens, and that is, what can you tell us about Conan Doyle's epitaph, "Steel true, blade straight"? Now, I know for a fact that Anna has done some work on this, and she's about to publish an article on it. So she will, I'm sure, come up with the final word on this. But
mm,
I'll give you my quick take on it, which is that we often think Steel True Blade Straight was created by Conan Doyle, but it's
mm,
actually from Robert Louis Stevenson.
mm,
And it's a poem he wrote called My Wife for Fanny Stevenson in probably around 1885, 86, I think.
mm,
And it came out posthumously in Songs of Travel and Other Verses in
mm,
1896. And it's a beautiful poem, actually. It's only three stanzas, but the first stanza goes, "Trusty, dusky, vivid, true, with eyes of gold and bramble dew, steel true and blade straight, the great artificer made my mate." And the interesting thing about that is that "steel true and blade straight" obviously is Conan Doyle's epitaph, but "the great artificer made my mate" is Jean Leckie's. It's interesting, isn't it, that, this is
mm.
something that's so closely associated with Conan Doyle, but I don't think it's really widely known that actually he didn't invent it.
No, I think it's just it is so associated with his epitaph that's and it is also different to the Stevenson, because Stevenson hyphenates
Yeah,
Steel
he
True
does.
and Blade Straight, which actually makes it slightly different. It
It
does
does.
does make a difference. So there's that. So you could say that Conan Doyle sort of made it his own, if that was the way, or was this gene, or was it just
Well,
carelessness?
I think there's a pretty good reason to think that it's him, and it's a strange
Mm,
reason, which is that when he was buried in his back garden
mm,
at Windlesham, and then they had to move the body in 1955. Both Arthur and Jean were buried in the back garden in spiritualist ceremonies, and they
mm,
had wooden plaques or wooden plates, and Conan Doyle's plate actually read "Blade True, Steel Straight" because it survives. That
mm,
it's in Portsmouth, and I think that's probably more evidence that it's Conan Doyle's than it's somebody else's. Because
mm,
if it was somebody looking it up, they'd have got it right.
mm,
But Conan Doyle, as we know from Through the Magic Door, and Sheldon Goldfarb's done some great work on this recently. Whenever he's quoting from books, he's quoting literature, he's quoting from memory. He
mm,
gets it wrong,
mm.
and there's a bit of a creative process that goes in the retelling. And I wonder if he actually maybe got it wrong, and then when they came to actually reinter him
Mm,
in Minstead, then actually they got it right at that point.
mm.
But that's just a thesis.
It sounds very convincing, Mark.
And I'm sure, and the final word on this will come from Anna, because I know Anna's done a
Mhm.
lot of work on this stuff. So I think her article is coming out in 2026. So we should look forward to that, and that will definitely be the definitive answer.
And I think as well, the kind of the impression you get just from that phrase, again, it ties into the phrase I've used several times in this, is this idea of Doyle as knight errant.
Yeah,
It's very much in you take that, it conjures up a certain image immediately,
it
and
does.
I think that's another reason for its choice.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of this episode. If you want to find out more about the episode, I wouldn't bother going to doingsofdoyle.com, because there's not going to be much in the way of show notes for this one. But do go to patreon.com/Doings of Doyle, because there'll be a bonus episode where we continue to answer your questions. There were lots more on the making of the podcast and also on our general opinions of Sherlock Holmes and adaptations and things like that we'll be covering in that bonus episode. You don't need to be a paid member. You can join as a free member at Patreon, but we will be posting that bonus episode on patreon.com. So, Paul, what are we doing when we come back after the Christmas break?
Right, for next month, again, a bit of a slight change in direction. We're going back to stories. And the one we've chosen is The Three Correspondents, which reflects on Conan Doyle's days as a war correspondent in the Sudan in the 1890s.
Brilliant. So until then, it's a goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
The personality of Holmes and the way of putting those methods into practice in real-life crime did not belong to Bell at all. It belonged to my father. And Bell himself was one of the first to see that, because he wrote to my father and said, "If you are yourself Sherlock Holmes, and well you know it."
How do your father feel about that?
He admitted it at the very end of his life. When he knew he was dying, he gave one last interview to an American journalist. This is in 1930. And he said, "I confess now that if anybody was Sherlock Holmes, it was myself."